My life collapsed 10 years ago when my family, especially my sister Emily, sent me out of the house. For what reason? Because they believed I deceived them only in search of a means to cover my own education expenses without consulting them. I was 18 and ready for college. Thanks to Emily, the golden child who had always made me feel inadequate, I suddenly found myself without anywhere to go. Emily is 4 years my senior, and she was obviously the favorite since we were small children. It wasn't subtle either. My parents nearly threw Emily a parade if she received an A in her classes. Should my mark be an A? It more like, oh, that's great. Dinner is what we have planned. Growing up, I simply believed that Emily will always exceed me, hence nothing I did would never be good enough. My folks behaved as though she was some sort of prodigy when she left for a prestigious business school. They covered everything: her apartment, her tuition, her pricey wardrobe. I kept my head down and realized I would have to accomplish tasks on my own. So when I was admitted into a reputable university in the UK to study history, I reasoned maybe, just maybe, I might have some help from them. I mumbled. My parents told me straight out they couldn't afford to pay my tuition. Although I knew education is costly, what truly suffered was their denial to even co-sign a loan for me. I was only asking for a little assistance to avoid drowning in debt for the rest of my life. I was not asking them to pay for everything. We battled over it a lot, but their logic was always the same. We have paid for Emily's college. We have to consider our future now. They were also intending to launch a small business at the moment, and presumably all of their savings were directed toward it. They seemed to be purposefully laying obstacles in my path. They had no trouble lavishing a lot on Emily, but when it came to me, they became abruptly frugal. I came to see I was alone. I turned to my Aunt Sarah. The older sister of my dad, Sarah, is the exact antithesis of my parents. She is a successful, grounded neurosurgeon, most likely the only relative I could trust on. With her, my parents had always experienced a strange conflict. They behaved courteously at family get-togethers, but I could sense their jealousy of her achievement. Particularly, my dad appeared to object to how much better she had lived than he had. Though I was desperate, I wanted to avoid involving Sarah. I got in touch, asking whether she might assist with my tuition. She hesitated not at all. "Of course, I will be helpful. Why did you not come to me earlier?" she said. Still, I fretted about my dad learning. I understood he would lose his sanity if he discovered I had gone behind his back to ask Sarah for money. I so urged her to keep it a secret. Everything seemed good for a little. I was getting set to head to university. My tuition was paid for, but Emily chose to blow everything out at that point. I have no idea how she discovered I had requested Aunt Sarah for assistance, but nevertheless she did. And as Emily, she had to make it really significant rather than just let it pass. After hanging out with pals one evening, I arrived home and felt something was strange right away. Everything was well put in cartons, my bookcases, my clothes, even my bedding. Emily was standing in the living room, looking smug as my folks were seated there. It felt as though some warped interference. I had no understanding what my dad was talking about when he tossed a bundle of papers to me. "Explain this," he said. Looking at the papers, I understood Emily had gone totally insane. She had created phony emails between Aunt Sarah and me, pretending to be leaking specifics about my parents' company in return for Sarah covering my tuition. My eyes went crazy. Emily had looked over my laptop, discovered some emails between Sarah and me, and corrected them to present me as having betrayed the family. I went silent. My parents wouldn't listen when I tried to explain that everything was phony. "We trusted you, and you stabbed us in the back," they claimed. Of course, they believed Emily because of what they naturally did. They consistently trusted her. Whichever I said, it made no difference. I left. They instructed me to walk right out of the house. Emily's deception resulted in an official kick-out order. I asked them to give it another thought. After Aunt Sarah had already promised to assist with my tuition, I wanted to spare her from more responsibility. But my folks showed no concern. That was it. They dubbed me a traitor and declared they had nothing to do with me. Having packed what little I had, I moved in with Aunt Sarah. I still find it difficult to imagine how I may have survived without her, something I hadn't experienced from my parents in years. She brought me in without thinking twice and treated me like family. Sarah was the only one who worried about me while my parents were preoccupied honoring Emily and their future company goals. I shall always appreciate it. Walking into my house, seeing all my belongings packed away, my parents gazing at me like I was a criminal, and Emily with that smug expression on her face, knowing she had won, still haunts me though. So I was standing on Aunt Sarah's porch, my life in boxes. I was still trying to understand what had happened. It seemed like a terrible dream. How do you go from living in a family to spending one night homeless? It was crazy. Still, at the same time, it wasn't very shocking. Emily came first. My parents had always made it very evident. As the nice person Sarah is, she greeted me warmly. She pried and asked a million questions less. She assured me that her house was mine for as long as I needed it since she just noticed I was struggling. That kind of compassion really touched me, as I knew from my own parents I had never felt anything like that. I moved in with her. First, waking up in her guest room felt unusual, but it soon felt more like home than the place I grew up always did. Sarah filled up many holes I hadn't known before as we grew more conversational. Actually, years before I was born, my parents had been jealous of her. Her success seemed to eclipse my dad. She attended medical school, married a wonderful man, who sadly passed away early, and was flourishing in her work. My dad was doing fine at the time, but he couldn't deal with Sarah's greater success. That bitterness permeated my parents' treatment of me over years. While I was always a secondary consideration, Emily is all they put. They attempt to make her the ideal daughter. Years before, Sarah had realized this out. She stayed quiet since she didn't want to aggravate things for me. Now that I lived with her, she shared everything. At last, it also made sense. It all boiled down to this strange familial dynamic I was not even aware existed. Why my parents seemed indifferent to me. Why they bent over backward for Emily. Although I could not really relax, living with Sarah was fantastic. Neither my parents calling nor Emily showing up out of nowhere occurred as I continued waiting for either. Weeks went by, and I never heard from them, not one text or phone. I was first furious. How could they simply discard me as if I were nothing? But then the wrath subsided, and I started to feel numb. Weeks became months, and still I didn't get word from my parents. The quiet was almost unbearable. It seemed as though I had been totally deleted from their lives, as though I no longer existed for them. The rage was first rather strong. Really, how could you simply leave your own child like that? After everything, I thought perhaps, just perhaps, they would have arrived. They did not, however. I began to feel numb about the entire event at that point as well. My only lifeline at this period was Aunt Sarah. Unless I wanted to, she never forced me to share what happened. She allowed me the time to sort through all of it. Though it was a lot to manage, Sarah made the anger and betrayal bearable. She made sure I had everything I would need before I left the UK and helped me arrange everything for college. I really have no idea how I would have survived without her. Still, there was weight hovering over me even with her encouragement. The quiet from my parents felt like a continual reminder that they didn't really care. After kicking your child out, you would think they would at least check on him, but not at all. Nothing. Funny how you can miss someone who treated you so poorly, but I suppose that's what results from being raised to get their approval throughout your life. About 1 month after everything exploded, one afternoon I received a text from Emily, among all the people. It was the exact kind of arrogant, irritable thing she would send, hence, I recall it really precisely. All mentioned was, "Hope you're doing okay. By the way, don't leave your laptop lying around." Just a small stab, reminding me she was the reason I was on the street. No apologies or recognition of what she had done. Feeling my blood heat, I fixed my eyes on the television. She was clear and simply teasing me. I considered answering, considering launching a caustic comeback. But what good was it? Emily was not the kind of person experiencing guilt. She had won the twisted little game she had been playing in her head. I thus banned her number instead of interacting and attempted to move on. It took work. Every time my phone buzzed, I found myself yearning deep down that perhaps it was my parents at last reaching out. Perhaps they had come to see they had erred. that they had been mistaken to believe Emily's lies over their own son. Nevertheless, each time I searched, it was nothing. Just silence. Following months saw Aunt Sarah and me in a good rhythm. Before she headed off for work, we would have breakfast together. In the evenings, we would sit down and discuss everything and nothing. She evolved from being my aunt to my friend, confidant, and in a sense the only family I had left. These protracted conversations helped me to see just how badly my parents actually were. They really lost out on everything else, having devoted so much time to attempting to shape Emily into their ideal kid. Deep down, I knew Emily would finally screw up. She always gave appearances more thought than she did in actually working hard. And when she did screw up, my parents would have nobody else to hold accountable except themselves. It was only natural given time. Unexpected happened while I was preparing to head for the UK. My dad sent me a note here. "Good luck in the UK," was the brief, nearly frigid simplicity of it. Not one of my apologies. No justification for their tossing of me like trash. Half-hearted good fortune felt like a punch in the face. That was all he had to say, following all they subjected me to. I not even knew how to reply, thus I didn't. I simply tried not to think about it after deleting the mail. Aunt Sarah drove me to the airport that day, and I set off for the UK. She told me how proud she was of me, and how she knew I would do fantastic things as she hugged me farewell. Someone in my family had uttered such words to me for the first time in my life. It struck harder than I anticipated. I felt as though I was leaving behind more than just my house. I was leaving behind the part of me that had always been ravenous for the approval of my parents. I concluded at that point I no longer needed them. I had myself. I had Sarah. I had my future. If they wanted to get in touch, great, but I was not going to waste any more effort following those obviously unconcerned about me. I was finished. Life in the United Kingdom was unique, in a positive sense. I thought I could really breathe for the first time. I stopped obsessing about my family and about whether I was meeting their unreasonable standards. I concentrated on my academics, acquired some new acquaintances, and simply tried to enjoy life free from the drama of living under my parents' house. I would not say I neglected them. Surely that is not really feasible. But they ceased to be on my thoughts as much. I was creating a new existence in which I was free from continual attention-grabbing for approval. It felt rather good, extremely good. Things were running quite well. I had a good group of friends. I was on schedule to graduate. And at last I was beginning to feel as though I had some influence over my life. Naturally, though, something had to throw everything off, even as things were running perfectly. I was in my last year and received a call from my mother. Indeed, the same woman who had not spoken to me since the day they kicked me out. My phone buzzed as I went over notes for paper in my dorm room. For a moment, I believed I was seeing her name when I looked at the screen. After nearly 2 years of total silence, why was she phoning me now? Heart thumping, I fixed my gaze on the television. Should I respond to this? Though curiosity won me over, part of me wanted to simply ignore it. Against my better knowledge, I grabbed. "Hi there." Though my mind was racing, I said, trying to seem composed. Like she wasn't sure what to say, the other end stopped. She then finally spoke. "No kidding," I thought. "That is your mother." I did not, however, mention that. I said nothing, waiting for her to explain why she was calling me after all this time. She remarked at last, "We have to talk." I let out a sarcastic laugh. She wanted to talk right now. Finally, after everything, it was expected. Still, part of me was fascinated even though I was irritated. Given all this, what could possibly be so crucial that she was reaching out now? "About what? Keeping my voice objective?" I asked. She stammered over her words like she was trying to figure out how to say it. "Your father and we want to see you." Proper. Where this was headed, I could clearly see. They missed me or felt guilty about what they did, hence they wanted no to see me. No, they needed something. I had a really decent idea about what it may be. "For what reason?" I asked straightforwardly. She responded slowly, which essentially validated my doubts. Her voice was softer, almost as though she were attempting to appear maternal as she spoke once more. "You, Dad, and I have been having difficulties. Not easy since the epidemic. Yet there it was, the actual motivation for the call. Money issues, precisely what I had assumed. Although I had not heard much about their company since I left, I knew it was not doing as it should. Sarah had indicated in passing that their store wasn't performing as expected, and given the epidemic, it made logical that they were having difficulties. But I was not about to swoop in and rescue the day, not following all they would have subjected me to. "All right, and?" said, not making her life easy. She added, her voice faltering, "Your sister Emily, she's been managing things, but she's been having some trouble." I laughed bitterly, not sure why. Let me speculate. Emily screwed it shut? The stop on the opposite side was exactly what I needed for confirmation. She had obviously botched it out, of course. Emily always seemed more concerned with appearances than with actually working. Her was the source of all their faith, and now it was exploding in front of them. My mother gasped a faltering breath. "Things have not turned out as expected. We need aid." I laughed louder this time. After everything, they had the arrogance to come to me for assistance. Unbelievably wonderful. It stunned me. Now they needed my aid, after booting me off and selecting Emily above me for years. The arrogance was almost unbelievable. What's so humorous? With a sincere perplexity, my mother inquired. Not sure why I wasn't grabbing at the opportunity to swoop in and save the day. "You're really serious? You really believe I will be of use to you?" My voice grew as I asked. The rage building up was all the feelings I had been stifling for years beginning to leak over. "You threw me from the house. You thought Emily's falsehoods passed over your own son. You need me now after not talking to me for almost 2 years. And I suddenly have to drop everything and come running." Silence emanated from the other end. My mother lacked ideas for what to say. She most likely wasn't used to my advocating myself this way. I would have followed everything they advised back when I lived at home in order to keep the peace. Still, not anymore. I was no longer that person. Her voice had changed when she at last spoke. She was no longer striving to be gentle and protective mother. She sounded annoyed now, as though she couldn't accept I was doing so deliberately. "We still are your family," she said sharply. That was it. "You owe at least that much to us." That stood as the last straw. I owed not anything to them. Actually, it was they who owed me apologies. But for that, I wasn't holding my breath. I responded sharply, "I don't owe you a darn thing. Go ask Emily if you need assistance. Recall, she is your golden child." I hung the phone, my hands shaking from the surge before she could reply. Though my heart was racing, I had an unusual release. At last, I had spoken what I needed to. Having at last stood up for myself, I was not going to allow them drag me back into their mess. I told Aunt Sarah what had happened when we spoke that evening. She not at all found surprising. "Emily has been their dependent for years," she remarked. "It was only a matter of time before it all caught up with them." We spoke for some time, and by the end of the conversation I felt even more certain that I had made the correct choice. Emily was picked by my parents, and today they were paying the cost. I was not chosen. Correcting their errors was under my purview, not here. I felt free, for the first time in a long time. Their permission was not what I needed, nor their acceptance. Now I had my own life, and I was not about to have them pull me back into their poisonous universe. That seemed to mark the end of it. After that phone conversation, I realized I would be at last free from all the family strife. Naturally, though, I undervalued the tenacity of my family. 2 weeks later was not even when the following wave arrived. Furthermore, this time it was neither Emily or my mother. Standing on my porch like some sort of united front, it was both of my parents. Another Saturday was here. Funny how on my days off all of these conflicts appeared to occur. I heard the knock at the door while seated on the couch, browsing through my phone. Nor was a gentle tap either. One of those strong, relentless knocks that indicated whoever was on the other side wasn't intending to be going very soon. Rising, I immediately felt like I might be sinking over who it might be. My parents were standing together as though on a mission as I opened the door. While my mom had that resolute expression in her eyes, my dad seemed uneasy, as like he did not really want to be there. She was prepared to smash her way through anything stood in her path. and obviously that obstacle was me. I sighed and slanted against the doorframe. You want what? Already tired just looking at them, I questioned. Clearly trying to make things amicable, my mother faked a tense smile. Can we come in to chat? We have to straighten some things up. I was like to bang the door in their faces, but part of me thought if I denied them access now, they would simply keep showing up until I did. I sighed heavily and turned aside to let them enter. They entered the apartment and looked about as though they expected anything more than the basic space I had, while my mom made a beeline for the couch, touching the seat next to her as if she were attempting to gently prod me into some sort of heart-to-heart chat. My dad remained silent. I said straightforwardly, crossing my arms, "I'll stand." "All right," she answered, trying to keep that tight smile on her face. "Look, we know things have been rough between us." I arched an eyebrow. "Difficult?" I said again. "That is what you are referring to?" At last my dad spoke, his voice rough and low. "We didn't come here to dispute. Then what did you come here for?" I questioned, hardly able to keep the irritation out of my voice. "Because we most certainly have already covered everything. Emily made a try. You attempted. And I also made myself clear. I'm not helping." The smile of my mother faded momentarily. She obviously wasn't accustomed to me pushing back in this way. "That's not why we're here," she murmured, tilting forward. I almost laughed in her face. "We are here to apologize." Apologize? Exactly for what? Pushing me aside? Believing Emily's lies? Alternatively, it might be for not showing up to check on me for 2 years. My dad moved uneasily in his seat while my mom's face tensed. They obviously hadn't anticipated me tossing it all back at them in this way. My mother added, her voice softer now, "We know we made mistakes. But your family still is ours, and family stays together." There it was once more, the same worn-out slogan they had used my whole life. They would take out the family card if something went wrong, as if it were meant to wipe all that had transpired. But this time I was not drawn to it. "You're only here because you need something from me," I stated plainly. "I wouldn't even be hearing from you if the company was not in crisis. Let's not pretend this is about family." There was a long silence before my dad began. Though his voice was harsh, there was a candor about it that I had not heard from Dad in years. She sighed hard and said, "You're right. We screwed up. We agreed with Emily. We didn't second think about pushing you out. And now, startled, things are breaking down and we are frantic." He not seemed to be laying it all out like that. Conversely, my mother seemed to be barely keeping it together. She had clearly not intended for this to be how things turned out. After a protracted silence, I said, "I value the honesty. But it doesn't change anything." My mom interrupted suddenly, her voice more pointed. "It does not change the fact that we need you. You owe us also." And there it was once more, the entitlement, the idea that I owed them something just because they were my parents. After everything we have done for you, they genuinely felt I should be appreciative of all the years of favoritism and mistreatment. "I have nothing to owe you," I responded, my voice icy. "Not following your treatment of me. You chose Emily above me when you kicked me off and neglected to see whether I was all right. You now ask me to save you? That's not how this goes." My mom wasn't done yet, but my dad stayed quiet. "We are your parents," she said quickly. "We reared you. We treated you. And now you are simply going to desert us?" I shook my head and nearly felt bad for her. "You looked after nothing except myself, as advised by Aunt Sarah. You choose Emily, and today you find yourself stuck with her. That's on you." My dad put a hand on her arm, stopping her from uttering whatever enraged words were on the tip of her tongue. My mom looked like she was about to blow. At last, looking me in the eye, he got up. Quietly, with a mournful voice, he said, "We understand. We are not going to press you going forward. We just needed to try." I felt almost guilty for him for a split second. But then I realized all they had gone through, and any pity I had vanished. I said, "I hope you figure it out," and walked over to open the door. "But I'm not going to be part of it," my dad said, as predicted. Half angry, half pleading, my mom gave me one more glance. When she saw I wasn't moving, she got up and trailed him out. I closed the door behind them and waited there momentarily to let the silence settle in. I had done it. At last I had stood up to them, and for the first time I felt truly free. After my folks departed, I stood there leaning against the door and let out a long sigh of relief, first in what felt like eternity. Though it was not a simple chat, it was the closure I was unaware I needed. Years of feeling as though I was imprisoned by their expectations and continual rejection had finally allowed me to say what I wanted to, and right now I was free, genuinely free. The next several weeks were quiet, almost disturbingly quiet. I went about my regular life, classes, friends, graduation planning, and for the first time in a long time, I was not depressed about my family. Being able to concentrate on my future, without always glancing over my shoulder and wondering when the next blow might strike, felt odd. Naturally, however, peace never lasts indefinitely. Something happened that pulled me right back into the disaster I had been attempting to flee from just when I felt I might go on for good. Another Saturday. Funny how these things usually happen on my days off, when Aunt Sarah called. Her speech was steady as usual, but her tone suggested I should pay close attention. She deliberately said, "They came to see me." I had no need to find out who she intended. My parents. It always was them. What did they desire? Though I already had a very good idea, I inquired. "They have run out of choices, you know," she sighed. "The company is collapsing and they are rather desperate. They also share fear." I felt a sour chuckle coming up inside me, but I gulped it down. I believe they are at last understanding Emily is not the miracle they expected. "What then? Coming to you seems like it will solve everything." Sarah stopped for a moment, then responded, "They insisted on me speaking with you." I shook my head back against the couch, thinking I could persuade you to assist them. Clearly they did. All else failed. They returned crawling to Sarah. She was always the one they hated, yet under difficult circumstances, she was the one they secretly depended on. "What you said?" Already knowing the answer, I asked. She said simply, "I told them the truth. You have no responsibility for resolving their issues." And knowing they burned that bridge a long time ago made me grin. No matter what, Sarah had always been the one person with my back covered. She did not try to smooth over the cracks or sugarcoat events. She told it just as it was. "Thanks, Sarah," I murmured gently. She laughed a little bit. "Don't owe me thanks. You made this decision personally." After we hung up, I sat there for some time considering everything that had transpired. I am here to remind them that they cannot reverse the harm they caused. Like I had feared it would, my parents, Emily, the company was disintegrating. The odd thing was that I felt no sympathy for them. Not even a bit. I suppose that's what results from spending your whole life stooping backward for people who never see you. By the time they at last reach rock bottom, you are already so far gone that their demise hardly counts as your issue. Nevertheless, it was unusual. Even if my family had caused great pain, there was a part of me that yearned for them to reach out, atone, and at last see me for who I was. But I knew better than what one would hope. They were not the kind of people to own their mistakes, and I was ready to spend no more of my life waiting for something that would never materialize. And I was right as well. I heard snippets of what was happening with the family during the next few months. Sarah would say things in passing, like how Emily was trying to hold everything together and how the company was hardly surviving. None of it, though, particularly bothered me. It was like seeing a narrative I no longer participated in develop from a distance. I had created a totally fresh existence for myself by the time I finished college. Along with a place to live, a job lined up, and friends that felt more like family than my own family ever had, I also had it thrilling to feel, for the first time, as if I were in charge of my own fate. Still, there were times when the past would rear up on me, like the moment I received an email from Emily, unexpectedly. Though it was only a few sentences, it was sufficient to bring back all those old emotions. "I screwed up," she wrote. "Though I believed I could manage everything, I can't. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. I'm not expecting you to forgive me." I stared at the screen, my emotions a mix of uncertainty and rage and something else I couldn't exactly describe. Emily had never atoned for anything in her life. Suddenly she was trying to atone. Part of me wanted to answer, to tell her precisely how badly she had damaged me and how her lies and manipulation had split our family apart. But another side of me, that which had spent the last few years healing, knew better than to revisit that scar. I thus performed the only action I could. I erased the email. Emily told me that was the final time. She is still, as far as I know, attempting to keep the family business going while still following the ideal of perfection that our parents pushed into her brain from her early years. But now that is not my issue. Ultimately, I came to see something that had taken years to grasp. I didn't need their permission. Their approval or apologies or their acceptance was not what I needed. As I was sufficient, and that was among the most liberating insights of all. Aunt Sarah was right all through. I had no bearing on their concerns being resolved. Not me was the one who had to rescue them from the mess they had produced. Now I led my own life, and that was more than plenty. Late at night, I still find myself thinking about that day I entered the house and discovered all my belongings packed, my parents preparing to discard me like I was nothing. I consider Emily's face, that arrogant expression that indicated she believed she had prevailed. But just now, I view things differently. I turned out to be the winner ultimately. I constructed a life free of their poison for myself. People who loved me and saw me for who I truly was came across. Above all, I discovered I didn't need them to define my value. I so feel calm as I sit here in my apartment gazing out at the city skyline. Though in the end it worked out just the way it was meant to, my life might not have unfolded the way I had hoped it would. For that, too, I am appreciative.